You're on Rhema 94.9. It is 18 minutes past 4 and it's Tuesday afternoon. That means it's time for Creation Ministries International. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Ron Neller, who's, look, it's not his first time and we love it when you're on, Dr. Ron. In fact, last week, Dr. Ron, we were talking about a few things that were very much your specialty. We were talking about geomorphology. And, you literally used to teach all about that stuff in universities. Good afternoon, Dr. Ron Neller.
Good afternoon, Mick. Yes, I did teach that in universities around the world.
Yes, and it's always good to ask you questions about this stuff. Last week we heard a bit about like Uluru and the algas, and you know the way that the way they were formed, and a couple of questions that we can sort of ask you this week that. Possibly sort of similar, they're in line anyway. One is looking at the geology of Earth. Where is the original landscape?
That's a good question, Mick, because I raise that often when I'm speaking to congregations or youth groups, because we should see, if the Earth is millions of years old, we should see that sediment has gone down and buried previous landscapes. But in all my travels around the world, we don't see buried previous landscapes. For some reason, there is no previous landscape. All the sediment is on bedrock. So I guess that's a great question, because when we look out today, we see hills and valleys and floodplains and all sorts of things. And when we see sediment go down, we see it burying some of that. So therefore, we should have if it's millions of years, we should have lots of buried landscapes. But guess what? As you've said, we can't find them.
Yeah, so when you say this stuff sort of has dropped, I mean, sedimentary rock, that's basically just stuff that has been all torn up before in a flood, of course. That's what causes or sedimentary rock has formed from all of that sediment. So what you're saying is there's nothing there's no rock layers that aren't sedimentary on top of that, and the other way around, there's no actual landscapes below it.
There may be other rocks on top if we have volcanic and metamorphic, but within the sedimentary rock, yes. If you let me give you an example, particularly down Sydney Gosford Way. If you drive on the freeway, the Bruce Highway, and you look at the rock cuttings, what do you see? You see lovely horizontal lines. You know, you see all of these layers of sediment that has turned into rock, all in beautiful horizontal lines. Now, if that sediment had come down slowly over time, then it should have captured erosion that had occurred before, gullying that had occurred before. It should have covered previous landscapes.
Oh, I see. If they were millions of years old, there would be gullying within those layers. It's the Pacific Highway, by the way.
Yes. So when sediment gets washed down, and we see it today, it covers an existing landscape.
Yeah.
And it buries that landscape. But when we look in the past landscapes, we cannot find that buried landscape. In other words, it wasn't there.
Wow.
Something's happened.
Yeah. So it's so many of these giant, I guess, layers in this sedimentary rock. They're just giant layers. They don't have all the shapes in them.
Exactly. They might be all flat, or they might tilt a little bit upwards, but they're still basically layers, one on top of the other. And they will argue that this layer came hundreds of years after that layer, or even millions of years after that layer. But apparently in those hundreds or thousands or millions of years, there was no erosion, there was no weathering, there was no soil formation. Nothing happened. Rainfall didn't occur, floods didn't occur, because that line between those two layers of sedimentary rock is beautiful, intact and consistent.
Okay, Dr. Ron, why have you never told me this one before? This one, I mean, absolutely blows everything out of the water.
It does, particularly when I use it in a church or a youth group or a community group. I ask the question, where is the previous landscape? And you know what? We don't actually think there should. We don't actually put two and two together, that there is no landscape from millions of years ago. We can't find the line that shows the shape of what is underground of a past landscape. That's millions of years old.
Okay, so when you look at things like the one we were talking about last week, Ayers Rock, that is, we're creating the landscape in this moment, or, in the last period. But what you're saying is sort of beneath that again, there isn't another landscape within the layers below.
That's right. So what I'm saying is that the global flood, which very much 35 years of research convinced me that did occur, absolutely tore the planet apart. It tore apart the hills and the mountains and the valleys, turned it all into sediment, and then deposited it very rapidly in many, many layers, one on top of the other, not giving it time to reform any new landscape. So the landscape we see today is a post-flood landscape. There is no pre-flood landscape.
Wow. Wow, but I mean...
And it's not even what we see. We can do seismics and look way deep underground. We still don't see another previous landscape.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, of course, we find things underneath, but they were part of that giant flood, bringing all that stuff in, I guess.
Exactly. If it had been a slow process, we would expect to see deep buried soils. We would expect to see erosion channels deep down, now filled in with other sediment. We would expect to see weathering profiles. We would expect to see biological, remnants of biological activities. But we don't see it.
Yep.
It's just sedimentary rock. It is filled with fossils, of course, but that's all part of the catastrophic process of death and destruction that occurred.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it catches people off guard
Yep.
when they start looking, well, where's the previous landscape on this planet? There's only the existing landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it makes so much sense. We've got Dr. Ron Neller on the line. He is a geomorphologist. Yes, he's taught this stuff well, not necessarily this stuff, but he's taught all about geomorphology and what forms the valleys and the mountains and everything else. He's taught in universities around the planet, and he's just dropped a bomb on me. I mean, that is an absolute ripper. I can see exactly what you're saying. Where is that layer below that has all the extra valleys and everything else in it? It just doesn't. And that makes so much sense. Hey, we're going to go into a little break right now, but we'll be back with Dr. Ron very, very shortly. If you have any questions, please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Here on 94.9, it's 24 minutes to 5. And it's Tuesday afternoon. We've got Creation Ministries International on the line at the moment. Well, we've actually got Dr. Ron Neller on the line from Creation Ministries International. And, of course, you guys have a website, creation.com, with thousands of pages of info. And people can get their questions answered through the website. Or if you have a burning question, well, we'd love to, I'd love to get Dr. Ron Neller to answer it on air. You can just send it through to us, to our text line, and that is SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. Ron, you've been talking to us about, in particular, why or where is the original landscape? That was my question, and you're basically saying there is no original landscape. You go down through these layers that we see all over the place. Yes, we can see the current landscape where current rivers and things have cut this landscape down. But when you go down through the layers, there's not another layer with a different landscape, which has just blown my mind. One question I do have, though, is, of course, every now and again, you guys have told us over the years that they've found trees standing up on these layers. Now, I'm kind of interested, is that a layer where a tree has grown? Do they ever find these trees sort of 45 degrees? Do they actually have roots? Were they growing, or is it something that's sunk?
A good question, Mick. And in fact, they're not just occasionally around. There are millions of them, even just in southeast Queensland, where I live.
Wow.
Buried underground. And these, when we cut, like a road cutting, we'll often find these trees standing upright. What you're actually finding there is the trunk of the tree. They actually normally don't have any root systems there at all. What you find is the tree was snapped from where it was growing.
Yep.
And was then carried downstream and then deposited in massive sediment. So we call those, just to intrigue those who want to know, they're called polystrate fossils.
Well, what could snap a tree?
Well, it's an interesting thing that it would have to be broken off with incredible force. And I tell you, for years, for decades, we pondered that. How could that happen? But Mount St. Helens actually illustrated that when it blew up. Because when Mount St. Helens blew up, it just cut the trees off at ground level and left the roots in the ground and smashed the trees. And so you have these huge tree trunks all got washed down into a lake nearby.
Yep.
And what they did was they floated like a log mat, the old log mats that people used to walk across.
Yep.
They floated like that for a long time until before they sank. This is interesting. They didn't sink while they were horizontal. They actually turned vertical and were bobbing up and down in the water.
Right, because one end gets more saturated than the other, I guess.
Basically, yes. And so they're and the weight factor. So they're bobbing up and down, but then they sank down into the lake sediment, and there's almost like a forest on the bottom of the lake now. Now, there is one difference though between the Mount St. Helens and all the ones we find. The ones we find are preserved wonderfully from top to bottom, because they were buried with more and more sediments when they had sunk to the bottom.
Yep.
Whereas Mount St. Helens didn't have many more big eruptions, so the sediment supply stopped. So what we find there is that the tree trunk, and it's a tree trunk, there's no roots, basically, in the actual sediment is preserved better. The tree trunk above that and in the water is rotting away.
Wow.
So what does that tell us about all of these millions of tree trunks in rocks? Is they weren't buried, they were all snapped off by a violent event, and I'm going to put that down to the flood and volcanic eruptions, created millions of these trees, trunks of trees, deposited them on the ocean floor, basically, and it was later lifted up, but it was buried by sediment so rapidly the entire tree trunk was preserved.
Yes.
And not seeing that at Mount St. Helens. In other words, it's no point people saying to us that the rock at the bottom of the tree trunk is older by 1 million years than the rock at the top of the tree trunk. We hear that all the time, because no tree is going to sit there for 1 million years and not rot.
Yep.
In other words, they were buried rapidly in a massive global, I'll say global because it's all around the world, global catastrophic event.
Absolutely.
And the Bible describes that clearly.
Yes, and we all know with our timber decks how long the timber lasts.
Yes. Exactly.
Wow.
So,
wow. Well, you blew my mind today, Dr. Ron. That is an absolute beauty, and I'll definitely be using that in the future when I talk to people that are a little skeptical of the flood, because it makes so much sense. Another question that I have for you today, I hope we've got time, yes. Why don't colleges talk about the creation point of view?
Good question. This is global, not just in Australia, but Bible colleges do tend to avoid more detailed discussion from a creationist point of view. And I'm not being critical of them. I think they're not quite accepting the authority of Scripture in Genesis 1 to 11. They're not quite accepting all the doctrines that flow from Genesis 1 to 11, such as marriage and family and the fall and sin and death. And I think this is because Bible colleges they do not have people who are trained in science. And so they don't understand. They think that scientists in universities is the only version. Yet there are thousands of scientists, top scientists, who argue no. But I think most Bible colleges don't quite understand that. I think there's a lack of understanding. I think also the Bible colleges are trying to avoid a faith versus science conflict, which really doesn't exist, but they think it does because they're not trained in science.
Yep.
And I think also they do need to attract government funds, some of them, and so they are living in a secular system, accreditation system. And so, look, I would say they're subject to pressure, accreditation pressure as a Bible college. Okay. So I think what they're trying to do is simply, in one sense, to give them credit, I think they might be trying to help students from avoiding a crisis of faith versus science. When in fact, I don't think that's the way we should be going. If you want to be a pastor and you want to be a pastor who can understand both arguments, you need to be taught both arguments.
Yes.
But I don't see that happening in most Bible colleges, and that's not just in Australia; it's worldwide.
Wow. Well, that's Bible colleges. What about just normal colleges? Obviously, they don't touch it either.
No, they'll touch it only from a scientific point of view, secular science point of view, if that at all. Yes. So but it is disappointing, and I think we need to look at it then from a pastoral point of view. If pastors and evangelists today are not being taught of the importance of the book of Genesis, particularly 1 to 11 and creation, I think that can affect them in sharing that message, particularly the fullness of the message of judgment and mercy, of the fall, of creation. I think they can be affected a bit because they don't quite understand the authority of the Scripture from front to back.
Yeah. And it's also looking at some parts of the Bible and saying, well, that one's more a story than reality. Yes,
and yet it's quite clear from the Bible itself that it's inspired and it's authoritative. And 2 Timothy, like 3:16 really mentions that. So we have to treat it as a historical narrative. It's not a myth. It's not a story.
Yeah.
But I think too often we find ourselves caught between a rock and a hard place, between society and its belief in scientific and evolution and old ages, and our own belief in a Bible that we're told is inspired and authoritative. And I think sometimes Bible colleges simply avoid discussing this.
Yes. And of course, for anybody out there who, has questions, creation.com has answers when it comes to all of these things, particularly when you look at, Genesis. And if you're wondering, how old things are, go through creation.com. There's just so much information in there, and so many of, just like today, why isn't there an original landscape? Something like that. It just felt like a smack in the head for me. There's so many things in creation.com that will, I guess, do the same thing to you. You walk away from it going, okay, it kind of definitely makes sense, and makes much more sense than some of the other stuff that we learn. Yes,
and to those listening, please feel free to write questions to us. We do answer every question that comes to us, either by a return email or some other mechanism, but we will not avoid the questions. So if there's any uncertainty in your heart, look, feel free. We're more than happy to maybe suggest something to read, or we'll give you an answer, all sorts of things. So that's what we love doing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ron Neller. Another awesome week. And, look, Creation Ministries, you guys are full of information. It's always awesome. And I thank you so much for your time today.
Look, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Mick.
You're on 94.9. Coming up next, we've got Kurt Anderson, Love Like You Love.